Welcome. Today it's time for another Take Two with Therese video for Altenew, and I've got two cards to share. I've got more ideas using the Gradient Cardstocks, and the set I'm going to use today is called Red Cosmos. I have the Festive Foliage die set. I'm not going to be using the stamp set today, and I've got two fun ways to use it, so hang around so you can see those. I'm going to start by just drawing an outline around the Christmas tree die, and I'm going to be making two different styles of cards today using the same products, pretty much the same products. So it's good just to share different ways of using your supplies over the whole year. So even though this is basically a Christmas set, I am going to be making one Christmas card, but the other one won't be. And you'll see what that one's going to be very soon. So I've grabbed three of the colours of the cardstock. It's the Frosty Pink, Coral Berry and Ruby Red. I haven't used the Grapevine colour today. I didn't want it to be too dark, but you could easily add in whatever you want. Now where I drew the outline of the tree, I want to use stripes to add colour and a fun element to my Christmas tree. And I don't need to erase the pencil line because I'm actually going to be adhering my cardstock strips, which I've just cut down with my paper trimmer, over top. And I do want them to be wider than the tree is because this is going to be sitting behind a negative die cut, and I don't want to be able to see the scrappy edges because that's not fun for anyone to see. So these colours of cardstock, I am mixing them up. I'm not being too routine, that's not the right word, too structured. I have cut them at all different widths, and initially I did my cuts on the short side of the cardstock, but now I need some longer strips, so I've just flipped my piece of cardstock around. I'm using the longer side, and I didn't even use one full sheet of each of the cardstock pieces for this, and there are 8 of each colours in the pack, so I've got heaps to spare. The other thing that you can do is actually snip off the edges of the cardstock if you have used the longer versions, and this is a really good trick when you are creating striped backgrounds with cardstock, and then you can just use your scraps to fill in the gaps. And I always use this because they're already cut and I'm not feeling like I'm wasting anything. I hate wasting stuff, especially card making stuff. So now I've got a piece of pale grey cardstock. It's cut smaller than the finished card size, and I'm going to actually die cut the tree shape from this, and I've centered it using the grid lines on my mat so that I know it's going to be nice and straight, because it's the external piece that I'm going to be using, not the actual die cut tree, because this is going to allow me to create that negative space to give the tree shape with the stripes within it. I'll just have to trim down my panel at the back so it's not going to be showing. So I used my Misty to stamp out a sentiment from the Modern Poinsettia set, and I used my Obsidian black ink, and it's a really pretty font in this set. I thought it'd be fun to add a big bow to the front of my tree, and I've got the holiday bow stamp and coordinating die set, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to go with the colours, but I thought I might as well use the Red Cosmos group of inks because I know they're going to match the stripes that I've created. So I stamped it in the Coral Berry for the background and added the Grapevine for the dark layer, and I just wanted it to be a little bit more shaded, so I just really did a small amount of simple shading with some red coordinating pencils, and also added some deeper shading with the black pencil. I know, who would have thought, come in with a black pencil on these pale colours. It's a game changer. Just don't press too heavy because you can always add more. So I put some fun foam on the back of the panel because I want the negative space to be recessed, so that by adding some dimension it gives it a bit of a fun feel. And then I can just adhere this to the front of my top fold card and also add the bow. I don't know about you, but you may have noticed there are lots of stripes again in the card making world. Not that they ever really went out of fashion, stripes don't, but they're very popular, and this Gradient Cardstock is perfect. So it couldn't have come at a better time, and I am having such fun with it. And the colours, because they're the same Altenew colours that I love, especially the coral berry, it's probably up there in my top 5 ever favourite Altenew colours. So my second card here is using pretty much the same products, just a couple of things I've changed up. And I'm starting by stamping out a sentiment from the Plentiful Pine stamp set. And this is actually, like, it's a Christmas set, but there's some really beautiful sentiments that can be used all year round. And I'm making a Valentine's card this time. So I'm using the same products, but this time it's not a Christmas design, it's Valentine's. And I've got the same cardstocks again. And what I did was multiple stamp out the sentiment once on each of the cardstock colours. And this time I'm actually adding the pale grey into my stripes. And because I'd stamped it with my Misty and in exactly the same spot each time, it just made it easier for me to work out where I needed to cut these down, so that when I join the sentiment together in stripes, there's not going to be a gap. I did consider making the stripes and then stamping over them, and that probably would have been fine, but I think I complicated it. But it worked. So I don't know, you probably got a much easier way of creating a striped sentiment. Maybe if I just had have done it on a solid piece of cardstock and embossed it, that would have looked really pretty too. And that way maybe it would have stood out a little bit more in the design if I had just used a solid piece of cardstock in that one heart. I don't know, what do you think? It would have to be the dark one, maybe. It's an idea for another card. There you go. So I'm doing pretty much the same thing again. I've covered a piece of Nina 80-pound cardstock completely with some glue tape here, and it's the dotted glue tape from Altenew, which I really do like. And the good thing about it is it gives you some wriggle time. It doesn't adhere completely initially, but once it's taken hold, so once it's been sitting there for a while, you get a really good strong adherence. That means that you can actually lift up and re-stick if you want, and I did change up my stripes a little bit along the way. I did cut a couple that were a bit thicker, but I didn't like the look of those, so I did keep most of them quite thin. And like I said, no structure to the flow of the colours, just whatever felt right at the time. And I basically covered the whole panel and centered my sentiment in that sort of sweet spot up in the top right sort of section of the card. So I used my scissors to cut off one edge of the card, and that way I could use my paper trimmer to actually cut away the other pieces, because I find if I use my scissors for a hole, I usually flip things over and cut things off with my scissors, but when I want this exact edge, sometimes I lose concentration and it can be a little bit wobbly. So the paper trimmer was a bit safer option for me. Right, now I've got the heart die. This is from the festive foliage set as well, and I've adhered it straight over the sentiment. I want to cut this piece out first, and I'm having a few issues with my low tack tapes at the moment. I've gone back to the 3M sensitive. That's not the word. It's like delicate, I think is the word. And I'm liking this one, but it didn't like me today. So I did only use small pieces, but a couple of spots I did need to sort of use an eraser, because it left, I think the tape might have had some black marks on it as well, but that seemed to work, and I only used very small pieces. The trick I used here was to die cut some copy paper of the hearts and actually scatter them over this panel, so that I knew when I placed my heart to do the actual die cuts that it was going to look or flow well over the card panel. And it's not going to be hard for me to tell which one goes where, but if you did have a very structured pattern, then you might find that you'd need to sort of label or keep them aside to remember which one goes where, because you want your patterns, well, you could mix it up, I suppose, but I wanted my patterns to look like they were lost. So I'm going to do that in negative space again. But what I did was actually temporarily adhere my panel on the front of my card and then attach all of my pieces of heart using the glue tape in place, and then I could just lift away that panel again. Like I said, this glue tape is quite forgiving, and as long as you don't leave it on there too long, and then I know that my hearts are in exactly the right spot. And actually I didn't mind the way the card looked with just the hearts on it too. I've added some fun foam to the back of the panel and popped it up, and just where I did get a couple of marks on my cardstock, I used the coordinating red Cosmos enamel dots. And I do like to adhere these with some matte medium, just because I don't know when I'm going to use this card, and then I don't have to come back and sort of adhere them later on if they did happen to fall off. I know they're not going anywhere with the glue, liquid glue at the back. So all the products will be linked in the description below. Thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you here again real soon. Bye.